Ah, hello guys, not sure if many people gonna join me today, but today is 11th of June 2017. It's another Sunday, it's another 8 o'clock. Just trying to pour myself a drink. No, and it's just a soft drink, so don't expect me to get too drunk by the end of this conversation. Just try not to spill the bloody thing. Kinda, I don't know, having a reasonably good day, reasonably good weather. I've missed another naked bike ride in Brighton. Every summer in England you forget that it's actually summer, you still think it's winter or spring. But last week I've pointed some subjects which I wanted to talk about. Over the next few weeks, the next week I will actually gonna make a break in those subjects straight away. And I'm actually going to talk about the result of the elections, because I think within this week we're going to actually see what's going to happen. Right? Cheers for that. But today I wanted to talk about a subject which was named quite a few weeks ago, probably a month, when I was talking about the socialism versus capitalism, or the silliest idea of pitting those two against each other. I did mention that the fall of Soviet Union was one of the greatest tragedies of the end of the 20th century, and as a matter of fact we're still getting the results of that tragedy now. A lot of stuff which is happening in the world, which is especially developed world, let alone undeveloped one. A lot of stuff that's gone wrong is actually a result of the fall of Soviet Union. And let me tell you why. Is when the Soviet Union existed, it was a purely socialist state which was kind of driving the socialist agenda. I mean, it's not that it was all that brilliant, it wasn't that bad either, because I actually had happened to live there for a while. But it was kind of driving, being that kind of saying that, look, the capitalist world had to look at and said, look, if we don't do the necessary bit on our end, if all the capitalists don't get together and don't do the necessary stuff to get this thing running, to fight against them, to provide that kind of support, then the Soviets are going to come and they start obviously using their media, getting into our media. There's been plenty of socialist media in UK, in US, in France, everywhere. I mean, it's still there. Probably not to such extent, but back those days, Soviet Union invested quite a bit of money into that media as well. So they knew that, look, if we start screwing things up, people are gonna notice. People are gonna fight us, As we can see the fall of Soviet Union, when the Union starts saying that, look, we're going to rebuild ourselves and we're going to join the world, and we're going to sell our natural resources at very cheap prices. The first thing that happened in England, well, all the mines got shut down. All of a sudden it became, not a good thing to mine for coal in England. They're paying too much. There's as the result, we can see that, we have areas where there used to be mines. Just unemployment there goes for 2 or 3 generations in a row. So, we can see that it didn't work out too well. Same as well, obviously the fall of Union, they were kind of pushing each other with China, but China becomes more capitalist, and all of a sudden they start selling their labor, local Chinese labor, at a slave level prices. The communism in days, yeah, we're communists, but we're gonna slave our people. Now we can see that, quite a few industries which depended a lot on human labor, making clothes and a few others, has been moved to China. Because it was dirt cheap to run there, they didn't have to take care about their employees, We can see the result. And that kind of crazy race for the cheapest price has been going on, for quite a while. same as, you know, the constant race to get as much money as they could from the people renting. You know, you get big money going into the property market, and now the property market is all screwed up. So all those things been, you know, they've been building up over the years. But obviously, so many people say, well, if socialism was good, if Soviet Union was so good, why did it fall? You know, if it was such a great socialist country, you know, why did it fall? Well, the thing is over like last few years ago, you know, we had this period where there's like, I knew a few people that were from ex-Soviet Union, who were from different areas. You know, it wasn't just me from Ukraine. There was people from Russia, people from, like, I think it was Lithuania, I think somebody from Latvia. And then we had this kind of situation where the women kind of came to England and they said, oh yeah, England's great, we have all the freedoms, blah blah blah, you know. We don't have to look after the men anymore, fuck you guys, you know, we're gonna do our thing, you know, great and proud. We said, okay, fine, but, you know, us guys, you know, guys are a bit more chilled out, you know, the guys did their job, they kind of said, okay, you know, fine, you know, we're just gonna go have our beers or whatever, and then we're gonna discuss politics or history or something else, you know, the stuff that actually interests guys didn't seem to interest the women. So the women went off for the clubs, they found their boyfriends, whichever, you know, some of them got married, good for them. But obviously they were not interested in kind of seeing, you know, where things come from, you know, they were interested in using what this society has been given them. And let's be honest, I came here at the start of 2000s, and this society, at least in UK, you know, I'm not going to go about US, for example, I haven't been there, but in UK the society had a lot to offer, you know, these girls, they could go work as a waitress, and their waitress wage was allowing them to, for example, pay her rent, you know, and she didn't have to rent a room, she could rent a flat, you know, a proper flat, you know, she could live there on her own, and she'd still have time and money to go out, you know, it's not like today where you go and you try to rent a flat and it takes up about like 80% of your wage, you know, no. That was the time when £1,000 could actually last you a month and you'd have a few hundred left at the end of the month, you know. I still remember those, many English people still do, quite a few young ones don't, but obviously by us guys we kind of went, well, you know, we have the money, you know, we were happy, we were young, so for us having a couple of £100 left at the end of the month after having gone to college or wherever, you know, it was quite a bit. So we started thinking, you know, why did Soviet Union fall apart? Because obviously, you know, when you lived inside it, it did seem like monumental structure. I mean, it was such a big structure. And, you know, we looked at it, and I think it's that social structure that has killed it. And the reason this structure got built up is we went, look, you know, there's been kind of very lots of things going not quite right in there. It's like, and when we looked at it and we said, look, there was only one major mistake which was done in Soviet Union, and until these days I think many people who actually lived in Soviet Union said, look, if the Soviet Union, if in 1980s, if we saw how people lived in the Soviet Union in 1980s, you know, well, we would see that. We would still, if that was the time, we would go back. We would go and say, look, you know, this is good, this is not so good. This is a small changes which needs to be done. But at that time, so the biggest mistake that Soviet Union has ever done, like the government of Soviet Union, the biggest mistake the government of Soviet Union has ever done was imposing an Iron Curtain after the Second World War. Alright, that fight to keep the people in was what kept the Soviet Union from evolving. Because like I said, like, having been there, having known a bit about socialism and, you know, understanding the socialism in its nutshell, you know, I'm not speaking about those theories which were built by people on top of socialism, like Marxism and Leninism. I mean, they had a few good things in there. But actual socialism in a nutshell, I understand, and understanding the capitalism in a nutshell, we're not talking about like some thousand of odd theories which were built on top of capitalism. We can see that socialism and capitalism, they essentially deal with different parts of what is called the Maslow pyramid. And if you look at the Maslow pyramids, it's the requirements of people like food, shelter, medicine, education, and then a few others go on top of that. And the socialism deals with the lower ones, like saying, look, you have to pay a fair wage, so the food must be available, the wage must take care about the food, the shelter must be there for people to take about, so all people have got to live in a single shelter. And what happened is that actually, if you look at the history of Soviet Union, they have achieved socialism and like communism in a way. They have achieved socialism and communism somewhere at the start of 1960s. Right? By the start of 1960s, there was pretty much no homeless in the country. Right? Almost everybody had a roof over their head. Fair enough, it was not a 2-bedroom flat or something like this, but there was nobody living in the streets those days. Like, no one. You couldn't live in the streets. You'd have a police officer come and pick you up and whack you in some flat. In like what they used to call a communal flat, which is in English terms right now is called a shared flat. So shared flat or communal flat is pretty much the same. So people have their room, and then they have a kitchen, and then they have to take a shower together if they're lucky to do so. I mean, and the thing is obviously in Soviet Union, when many people living there, when they saw the West, what they saw is the full shelves of the shops. They said, oh, people can go in the shop and buy whatever they want. It's like, my God, if you've looked into somebody's fridge, whoever was living in Soviet Union, you'd be surprised. You would probably find the whole fucking shop in the fridge. That's again one of the things which most people didn't understand. Is like, just recently I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were talking like about how, we lived in the different parts of Ukraine, and we were both talking about how our fridges were always full of food. People always had money. And if you couldn't buy stuff in the shops, like, the fancy stuff, the yogurts, for example, or like some 20 types of sausages or something like this. I don't know where they are in British shops. It's like usually you get 20 types of salami, but salami is not all sorts of sausages, And people would say, they would tell the fairy tales about the West. They would watch films about the West, but obviously the films they would watch they will not be showing the lowest levels of society. They will not show the film like something. What was it? I Am Jake, about the guy who kind of ends up in the system, in unemployment system after he has a heart attack. It's not like this. No, it would be the films about people driving Ferraris and stuff like this. It's like, you couldn't like this kind of film. So they would think like, oh, everybody drives a Ferrari, and here's me sitting in the Soviet Union. Like, last 4 years my family was putting away the money for the first model Lada, which was like a copy of, like, I don't know, Fiat 01 or something like this. It's been still produced in Soviet Union in 1990s. Okay, I'm not joking about this. They actually produced a car which they copied in 1960s, or beginning of 1960s, and they produced it all until 1990s. That's the problem. There's like, and people, it's not they could not afford that car. It's the fact that they had to get the money, and then they had to set themselves up in a queue for cars. Okay, there was no, like, and then you have the money, you have like 10 grand you need to buy the car, and then you have to go to the government and say, look, I want to buy a car, and they'd say, okay, the next car available is in another 10 years. And that's where many people were coming in the Soviet Union. They saw the shiny part of the West without ever seeing the bad part of the West. And the build-up was starting in the 1960s. Of course, the Soviet Union was not perfect. I mean, again, I'm Ukrainian, and there's many Ukrainians who wanted to fight for Ukrainian freedom. And those that did, especially the ones that did not so violently, they got picked up and they would be shipped off to another part of the Soviet Union, many of whom would never see Ukraine ever again. So fighting for independence was considered a crime against the country. I mean, again, in the 1930s, 1940s, it was a bit more violent. It was quite bad, people would get shot, but in the later stages of Soviet Union, it became a bit more liberal, kind of. It was like, look, we're gonna send you away, we're gonna make you live in some place. But it was also kind of fighting for two things. It was a fact that they were taking the people that would fight for freedom of their countries, or they take them out of, for example, Ukraine, and they would send them to the places where there was very low population, and they needed to make those areas more populated. So they'd send people in there and say, look, you know what, you have to live here, you can't live, you stay in here for good, that's it, this is your last place. It's like a free jail, basically. You can stay here, you can go to the neighboring city or something like this. Obviously, it will take you like 2 weeks travel to get there. But obviously, you can't go back to your home country. You can't go see your relatives. If they want to come and see you, they have to get the police permission. And they maybe will be allowed to travel here. So there was stuff like this. Obviously, like in many countries, at that point of time, English were fighting the Northern Irish, At this point of time, Sinn Féin is maybe not universally loved, but still a force which people, at least in politics, reasonably respect. Back in those days, let's be honest, UK army and police and Sinn Féin, they were at each other's throats. They were killing each other. These days we don't see that. It's a political process. But back then, obviously, times were different. People evolved since then, and we evolved quite a bit. Same what happened with Soviet Union. With time they've evolved, but the Soviet Union had a problem. From about 1960s, it was like getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It was growing. It was the fact that the socialist part they understood that they have actually reached socialism. In reality, they did, I think, but there were those who understood that. But there were also those who were kind of coming into power, the younger generation, that grew up on dogmas. They did not grow up to question those dogmas. For example, they would learn the works of Karl Marx, okay, a great theorist, maybe, I don't know. Not sure I've read his works, to be honest, or the works of Lenin. And that's it. So they will grow, they will learn those works, but they will have nothing to compare them with. So you had people that in the 60s, they were coming in and they were learning the works of Lenin, but they will not learn anything about capitalism, like true capitalism, like the market system, the basics of economics, stuff like this. Okay, they will learn the socialist economics, but they will not learn the other economics. They would not have anything to compare them to. So the system started to stagnate. And then you have the population. Like I said, by about 1960s, people were already reaching socialism. They did. Like I say, you had a place to live in. No one homeless, By 1970s, nobody even living in barracks. The only place you can find at loo, which is in the street, it's in some village where, they didn't even have, because the village was so far from everywhere else, they didn't even have the proper, walks under the village. So people would just build a house somewhere in the middle of the field, and then they put a loo outside, because obviously they dig a big hole in the ground, and obviously they'd go there. It's not because they couldn't have it in the house. It's just because that big hole in the ground was easy to clear out. Whereas if you have a hole underground, under your house, it's kind of hard to clear out. And obviously, what they did is they'd have a loo in one place, and then they dig it down and then move it to a different place, to another hole around their yard, you know. And then I was like, okay, you know, so that's 1970s in Soviet Union. The problem is those 1970s, end of 1960s and 1970s have continued. They kind of stopped, and they have continued all the way to the 1990s. I was like quite surprised when I came to England, and obviously, you know, me thinking, oh right, you know, the England is such a developed country, and then I'm reading the newspaper, and I was reading the notices about the houses that were being sold with all the comforts inside the house. I was like, what do you mean all the comforts inside the house? You know, and my mother's husband, I know, the guy who married my mother, they're still happy and married. Good luck, all the best luck to them. He explained to me that the comforts inside the house means that you have a loo inside your house. So basically have a shower and a loo inside the house. So I came here in 2000, and in 2000 until about 2005 it was still a thing in UK to have a house with the comforts inside the house, you know. And people in ex-Soviet Union, they didn't know about this, you know. They were like, whoa, you know, England is such a, you know, they have all these roads which don't fall apart, which was truly a problem for Soviet Union. The roads used to be appalling. I mean, many people, you know, had the money to buy a Ferrari. The problem is they would not be able to drive it on many Soviet roads. It's like they would disintegrate over the winter to the point where you couldn't drive a fucking truck across the bloody places at some point of time. Yeah, but again, you know, people didn't know that, and they saw this kind of flashy vest, and then you come here. And you know, when I came here in 2000, I was like, okay, you know, we heard all this about Soviet Union, in Soviet Union, about Europe. But in reality, you know, it wasn't such a big difference in the level of life between the Soviet Union and here. I mean, the only thing about the West was the fact that more people had cars. I think that would be probably the only thing which differentiated between England and Soviet Union. But even then, it wasn't because in Soviet Union at the end of the 90s people did not have money to the cars. It's because they did not have access to the cars. I mean, I can vouch that our fridges were full to the point of breaking. You know, you hardly ever had anybody with an empty fridge. So if all of this was fine, why was it falling apart? Like I say, flashy parts, you know, people, like I said, not being able to go to the West. Honestly, if the Soviet Union started saying, look, you know what, go to the West, if you won't come back, they would have probably found that there will be quite a few people that went to the West and then came back and worked twice as hard to make the Soviet Union work. You know, because they would go in and say it's not the culture, but sometimes you come in and you kind of go like, because obviously you think these bright pictures, but then you come in and you see here's like, wait a minute, the pictures are not that bright, you know. In 2000s there was already talks about people not being able to pay for their heating in their houses, old people dying because they did not have the heating in their houses. For anybody from, like, you know, who survived the Soviet Union, it was like, whoa, what the fuck? Can you imagine somebody, like, you know, some old people freezing to death in their houses because they couldn't pay for the heating? It's like, no, not really, you know. There's been obviously tragedies, you know, where something went really wrong and the heating just switched off. But not because people could not afford it. It just wouldn't, you know, because you come into the West and you think like, wow, you know, it's just like, blows my mind out, you know. How is it that people in 2000 in England, which is supposed to be this advanced country, which is like, you know, way above everything, and then all of a sudden people are dying here because they can't afford to pay the bills, because they had two generations already, second generation, which is out of work. They don't have any works there, you know. From 20 years ago, that's already the third or fourth generation in those areas where people don't have the jobs. It's like for Soviet Union, it was insane. Just to give you another story from history of Soviet Union, from the history of my family. My grandfather and grandmother, they used to work in the far north, like we're talking kind of Alaska kind of levels, like up there. Actually, not that far from Alaska, actually, just across the sea. And when people worked in the far north, they would work there only for 6 months. And then they would get a 6 months holiday, which they could do whatever they want. So over that time, my grandparents used their money to come over, and they looked around and they liked my home city where they continued living until they passed away. And they decided to build a house in there. As they finished building the house, you know, my grandfather came over, and at first it was like small house, then obviously it increased, but you know, if you came over, he said, look, you know, I was staying here, and he didn't go for walk for a month, so because he came over with his son, you know, my father was still kind of in school, so they kind of enjoying the summer, you know, chilling, and but people saw him not going anywhere, you know, just chilling, not doing anything for a month. And he said, one of those days I get a knock on the door. It's like, and he says, what I'm seeing is a police officer knocking on his door. And the police officer goes like, oh, hello, who are you, you know, how are you, you're doing well, okay. We've been told that you are not working, you have not been working for a very long time, you know. Is anything wrong? So, do you have a problem? You know, you struggling to find job, or something went happened, something went not right. My grandfather says, you know, obviously the idea was that he checked out, so obviously that the guy either needs some help with a job, or that the guy is not a criminal, but obviously doing it in a more polite manner. And my grandfather says, oh, sorry, mate, you know, I actually came over here, I work on the north, one of the north cities, and obviously he showed him these documents. Look, this is from my job, and obviously we get a 6 months holiday. And he says, okay, oh yeah, not a problem then, just as long as we know that obviously if you don't need any help. So he was kind of polite about this, but obviously as well kind of saying, look, you know, we showed you that we know that you're here, you know, we're paying attention. You know, that was the Soviet Union my grandfather knew. You know, and obviously, so this was kind of cool because everybody had a job. You could not have a job. You know, you could just work as a, you know, carry some, you know, like just a laborer in a shop, just carrying things around, or wherever. You still had to have a job. You had to have a 9 to 5, and you'd get a wage, and you know, you couldn't, for example, but you couldn't become a waiter without actually getting a degree in waiting. You know, you couldn't become a barman without actually getting a piece of paper saying, yes, this guy is qualified to be a barman. It's not like, you know, so it's like all this stuff. And obviously with people coming from that background, obviously comparing to all you hear in ex-Soviet Union and in many of those countries about Europe, you know, I'm not surprised that people are like, oh, Europe is probably so advanced. And obviously, you know, you kind of start comparing it. It's like, actually, 1980s Soviet Union was, the level of life in Soviet Union overall was not that much lower than the level of life in Europe. As a matter of fact, you know, it's like talking to people, obviously, many people, it's like, it's the access to the things. So many people in Soviet Union would pay double what Europeans pay for a videotape player. Why was it? Because they were not available. So they were literally smuggled into the country by people who would be sailors, or whoever had the chance to go to the Western countries. They'd go into the shops, they'd buy like 2 video recorders, one for themselves, one for sale, you know. That's what they've been allowed to do. But it's still quite a big chunk of the country had the video recorders, but it's the access to those things, obviously they were blocking the access. It wasn't the fact that, look, you not making enough money. Many people were sitting, they would have a job, and a job was about 100 rubles a month. If you were not going out like 3 times a week, if you just kept your, reasonable, you could have actually saved like enough, like 10-20 rubles a month. If you had a family of 2 people working together, you could be saving at like 100 rubles a month. So it's like, probably more, because some people obviously would buy stuff, they cook in bulk, they live in a flat which costs them like 3 rubles a month with all the bills. The food, if they buy it from the street markets and stuff like this, would cost them another like, I don't know, 30, 40, some clothes. But you don't buy clothes every month, So you could be saving, you could survive in a month on about 50 rubles without having, if you don't spend too much money on going out, if just food and just basic essentials. If you've got a family of 2 working together, you could be packing away, like I say, nearly 2 grand a year. At that time, 2 grand a year was a fair amount of money, quite a fair amount of money. 5 years you could buy a car outright, and it wasn't a cheap car. If you went for a cheaper car, you could buy it for 5 grand. So 2.5 years, of good saving, good concentrated saving, and you had a car outright. I wonder how many people can do this in this time and age, How many people can go and buy an outright 10 grand car on a, like, not a minimum, but mid-wage, okay? After they paid for rent in a reasonable place to live and bought the food and maybe bought some clothes. I don't think it's going to be too many. But back then, yeah, people which could just do it, but just wasn't there. There was another problem with Soviet Union. Because they achieved socialism, at a certain point of time, people found that you have this kind of way of life, okay? And it's kind of leveled out. And then you have this disparity between somebody who went on the party line, because their war talks about the special shops for party leaders and, obviously, the top 10% basically. And then you had the normal engineers, and the normal, like, everyday people. They could not progress. That was the problem of socialism in Soviet Union. It wasn't that it was bad. I mean, by all means, in many cases, the socialism in Soviet Union was actually more democratic than democracy in the West. For, like I say, and this is what many people who lived in Soviet Union will agree to that. But it was the part where it was not allowing people to progress. If you're a writer and you want to write a fantasy novel, it has to be a fantasy novel approved by some guy sitting somewhere who's about as capable of writing this novel as, I don't know, probably less capable than I am, The guy who still writes with fucking mistakes, but because he is within the party, he can tell you whether you can or cannot publish your book. Even if you, like, the writer was becoming a job, and the job you had to do for the government is like, so was the problem of the socialism in Soviet Union. Like, you did not have, like, if you wanted to make something, unless the government, you do something, you invent something, you build something, like, you say, okay, we don't have enough cars in the country, so I want to build my car, and you go on, and you take that money you've been saving for like 5 years, and you build your car, right? And you come to the government and says, look, and you say, look, I've built this car, and I want to build more. I want to hire people, I want to build a small, like, garage, like, or a factory, It's not going to be big. It's going to be like 20 cars a month. It's going to be, look, and they'll look at this and they say, yeah, it's a nice car. It's pretty safe. You know, it's got not a big engine. Yes, yes, yes. Well, fine. But we don't want to build it. It's like, yeah, but I don't want you to build it. I want to do it myself. I have friends that want to work with me and build this car. And they'd say, well, yeah, but the government are the only people who are allowed to hire people, because otherwise you will not pay a fair wage. I was like, oh yeah, but they're my friends. I will pay them a fair wage, you know. You know, it's not many of us. It's like 5, 6 of us, and we want to build this car. But the government will say to you, oh yeah, but where will you get the metal? Well, I want to buy it from you, or buy it from whoever who wants to sell me more metal. And they say, yeah, but we have our metal already planned out, because obviously they had a planned economy. We have our metal already planned out. And we want that metal for all these things. We will not give you the metal. You can't build your car. If you want, you can build like one a month for yourself, but you can't sell it, because it will be considered that it's like it will be the profit which you gained not through working. Or you go like, yeah, but if I build the car through working, through building it with my arms, how is it the profit which I gain not through working? But they say, well, yeah, we like your car, you can drive it if you want, but we will not give you a permit to build it. And if we don't give you a permit to build it, you're not allowed to build it and sell it. Because if you sell it, well, that's it, you go to jail. And this is what they found, is many people have found themselves hitting that wall. You know, so, like, for example, a story from kind of, again, history. The book, The Hobbit, the original Hobbit, we're not speaking just about the Lord of the Rings, we're speaking about the original Hobbit, had to be retyped on typewriters and passed on from person to person so that they could read the book. It would not get published. They just refused to publish it, full stop. It would get retyped and passed on from person to person, essentially pirating the book. For example, just because, you know, the government said, oh, we don't like this book, I said, you know, we will not let it even enter our market. Brilliant thing. One interesting story I read, which is like, obviously there's a lot of stuff about, like, written about what they call an alternative history, but a lot of these books in alternative history are based on real events, and one of these books have actually described a real event, which is, they said, look, you know, here's the link to that, where a guy, because obviously you could not buy music from the West as well, so like Led Zeppelin, no, can't be true. Beatles, you know, like, they're still using those plates, I don't know how they call plates, I think, they were still using those, plus vinyls or vinyls, I'll call them vinyls. So they're still using vinyls, and what the many pirates did is they would have the recorder for those vinyls, and they would use the films from the, you know, when you go to this machine which makes a film, if you've got anything broken or anything else, and you know, they quite often, to pirate the music, they would use those films and then cut the things with the needle into those things, and then you could play some music and then look at the light and you could see somebody's broken arm on it, you know, so stuff like this. And then one guy who started producing, it was apparently in Moscow, very, very good quality vinyls with the music from the West. And obviously, you know, the police, they kind of didn't like it, but obviously they said, okay, you know what, the problem they had is not the fact that he was making that music, obviously, you know, they quite often would let it slide. But they say, where's he getting the vinyls from? You know, where does he get this high quality vinyls from? Why? They just couldn't work it out. And how they caught him is they actually started looking, and then they found out that somebody was buying huge quantities of vinyls with speeches of Lenin, Stalin, and a few other political leaders. And what they done him for was not for the buying those vinyls, you know, and pirating the music. No, no, no. What they done him for is because he was wiping out the speeches of the leaders of the country. So they've done him for the political crime of, you know, abusing the speeches of these great people, wiping them off the vinyls and then rewriting them with some good music. And he got done for that. He basically got to spend like 5 years in jail, something ridiculous like that. And he's been caught because they said nobody bought those vinyls. This is how they caught him, is nobody cared by that time, you know, nobody gave a shit about Lenin. You know, nobody cared by that. They just went, look, you know, we don't care, you know, we done our exams with that stuff. We're not in the politics. We're just doing our jobs, you know. And obviously, when somebody starts buying those in huge quantities, the questions start being asked, what's going on, you know? Come on, guys, you know. So yeah, that's kind of the ridiculousness of situation was like this, is that the people could reach a certain level and then you couldn't move forward, you know. You could not buy a car. I mean, what you could do as well, you could probably kind of arrange your way into buying building yourself a house, you know. But even then, getting the right, you know, the right bricks, getting the right cement, getting, you know, the right piping, it was always a pain in the ass. You couldn't just go to the shop and just buy them and say, look guys, you know, I'm buying them. So you couldn't progress. You would reach a certain level and you were stuck. You were pretty much stuck. And this is what has undone the Soviet Union. And even though in Soviet Union many people were getting stuck in a reasonably kind of good situation compared to the West these days, but I think this kind of should give us a very good lesson. Because, you know, I say, getting stuck in a situation where you can't progress, where the situation is such that, you know, no matter what you do, you can't go forward unless you become like part of the political elite, unless you start like cheating and, you know, becoming like doing dishonest things, because like, or like abusing some position you're in, because this is what happened to many party leaders, because they were abusing the positions and people saw that, you know. Same as people see these days with the things that happen on the streets, you know, with the people being, you know, people with the money, they kind of abusing, like buying lots of properties and then getting them off the market so that the price goes up, you know. People like, you know, the train companies, you know, charging so much for the trains that you're gonna go like, what do you mean, you know? the oil has gone down in price, the energy should have gone down in price, and yet we have our energy bills are going through the roof, and you go like, how can they go through the roof if energy and gas go down in price? And then you get like, obviously comes back to having that 10% that are not educated enough already. They've been dogmatized in certain ways, and they can't. These days they're chasing that advantage of that. They've been dogmatized into chasing of like getting as much money as they can. You know, if we don't get billions, the world is gonna die. Doesn't matter that everybody else dies as long as we get our billions, and that's what's been happening in Soviet Union, because as the younger generations of the politicians were coming in, the people that were coming in, as I say, they've been dogmatized in there with this social reality, socialist reality, you know. But they did not have access to anything else. They have not been taught anything else. Until 1960, about 1958, there was a subject in Soviet schools which was called philosophy. It was the subject which was teaching Greek philosophy, Roman philosophy, like European philosophy. After about the times of death of Stalin, this course has been cancelled. So people were growing up without having anything to compare things to. I mean, most of us, when we were kids, we probably wouldn't have paid too much attention to this course. But we'd still have to study it. But no, they took it out. They took it out from the universities as well. So people who were coming in and learning to be the future leaders, they were not taught to be the philosophers, to question things, to analyze things. The analysis was not seriously taught in Soviet Union unless you were in a very specific school. Most of the political leaders in there, they did not have that skill. They were not that, that bright. The personal, the system was set up that if you're personally kind of signed up to this guy and he moves up, you move up with him. Doesn't matter whether you're smart or stupid. And that personal commitment was quite often more important, as we can see now with Theresa May. She was a good person that was like, to do things if you tell her, look, this needs to be done. But she screwed up so many things in her career, and yet her personal devotion to the Conservative Party had got her a place and as leader of the party, and we can see it was a disaster for everyone. There was quite a huge lack of this ability to get the feedback from the country as well. The people in charge, the top 10%, lived in a very different universe to the next 90% of the country. And just to tell you that, obviously my mother was kind of working in the clothes making, like little clothes making factory, but also she was doing private orders. So we could say that we have been kind of a little bit attached to this 10%, So when I say being a little bit attached, it means that, many of her customers were the wives of this top 10%. She was making women's clothes to order. And that whole little place where she worked, it was making lots of clothes to order. They had lots of customers like this. And, it's like when children, or like for example, were growing up and the parents want to buy them a push bike, they have the money for the push bike. Screw the push bike, But they couldn't get access to the push bike. Well, we could. I had 2 over my life in Soviet Union, so we had the access to the push bikes. Fair enough. They were not the best push bikes, but my parents could get me the push bikes, but many couldn't. And it wasn't like, you would get like the assigned push bike to you. So if your kid is like 3 years old, and you think at 7 he might want to ride a push bike, you have to sign yourself up for a push bike when your kid is 3. A skateboard, good luck trying with that, And we have this similar situation in UK these days as well. Like, it's just been achieved through a different means, to the point where people just cannot afford things because they have to survive. But it's still, again, people don't have access. People feel stuck. They are just surviving. In Soviet Union was falling apart because people were just, in a way, surviving. They had the money, they just didn't have the goods. If we were to look, there's recently has been another kind of similar situation in one of the countries in South of America, where the people have the money, but they can't buy toilet paper. Same thing in Soviet Union was happening. It's like people were saying, "Oh, we go to the West and we can use our money to buy toilet paper. Not like in here where we have to go and our fridge is full. We have a place to live. We have a roof over our heads. We've got the money in the bank account. We actually have a bank account. We don't get paid just cash in hand. We get money in our bank account. We've got like 1,000 rubles in our bank account, and we can't get some toilet paper, so we have to wipe our ass with a fucking newspaper. Why is that? We want the toilet paper. We want somebody to come here and make us some toilet paper. So, you know, this is what the problem had. Was these days what we have in Europe is becoming more evident in UK, and not so evident in Europe unless we're speaking like more Eastern Europe, where people kind of slightly more stressed for this. But for example in UK, where people finding themselves that when they got the wage, if they got the job, they've got the wage, they got paid, and then they paid for the everything they have to pay for, like their bills, like their television per license, their flat, their council tax, there's something else. They paid everything else, and they go like, you know what? I've got the money in the bank, and I have to choose between the toilet paper or no toilet paper, just having to wash my ass in a fucking shower every time I go for a crap, or buying some food. Right? Again, sort of like people kind of, yes, we kind of have this kind of socialism where people can afford food, but people can't have anything else. You know, so when people say that socialism is bad and the Soviet Union fell apart because of socialism, the Soviet Union did not fall apart because of socialism. The Soviet Union fell apart because the socialism was not caring about the other things. The socialism doesn't do this, and the Soviet Union was too late to understand it. And the government of Soviet Union, because the people that were coming there, they were so dogmatized, and they looked at the dogmas and they went, oh, these dogmas are not working. But they were not educated enough. They did not read enough Lenin. They did not listen enough Lenin. And did not read and listen enough of Stalin, actually, as well, to be able to start looking at alternatives without jumping to different dogmas. Okay, because there's a line out of Lenin. So I haven't read lots of his works, but this is a phrase which I think many people should remember. The phrase was as such: the education in Soviet, he was talking about the Soviet system, about the country of the Soviets. I don't know. But basically, he was talking, and he said, our education should be so good that should it be necessary, even a housewife can run a country with no problems. See, should be so good that even a housewife, a woman that doesn't care about running the country, you know, she's got her kid next to her, you know, she wants to take care about her husband, you know, she chose to be a housewife, you know. She didn't choose to go to the parliament. She couldn't give two shits about the parliament. And yet it happened so, and somebody comes to her and said, you know what? We decided that you're going to run the country for the next 5 years. And the education should be so good that even a housewife, it should be so comprehensive, it should push the people so forward, so much that even a housewife, should she be required, should be able to run a country. Because quite often this phrase is slightly like, well, not misinterpreted, but intentionally, not slightly, which say that Lenin said that housewives should run a country. Well, no, he didn't. He said that even housewives, like every person in the country, that the aim of the education system should be such that every person in the country who had a comprehensive education should be able to run the country and be able to have the width of views, the width of knowledge required to run the country without screwing it up. And I think after the 1960s, because there was very little feedback from the country, because they closed down, the education system was the next thing that suffered. And from the 1980s, we can see that same thing happening in Europe. The education, not even from the 1980s in here, from the about same time, we can see similar things starting to happen in Europe. About end of 1970s. beginning of 1980s, from the 1980s, you know, this education system was going downhill more and more. I mean, we are talking that by 2000 already, many companies would refuse to hire their graduates from the universities. They say, well, there's nothing where they can give us. People were coming out from universities not being able to find jobs. By 2003, 2005, when I was in university, I've heard people here saying, look, going to university is not going to get you a job. Going into a job is what's going to keep you in the job, and getting the university and doing a part-time uni when you're 40 is going to be better for you than going to uni when you're young. Okay, so the system in the Soviet Union was falling apart. The education started from limiting the education, limiting the width of knowledge, limiting the access to knowledge, and limiting access to other views, limiting access to being able to travel to the West. That was the biggest mistake of the fall of Soviet Union. But it was not the socialism. It was the people in charge, people who did not understand, people who decided that they don't need to learn more because they decided they're perfect. And then they screwed up, and they've destroyed what their people before them have built. Whether it was out of spite, whether it was out of something else, you know, whether they were trying to too much infighting, and the system was there that was not giving them a feedback, not getting and not listening to a feedback in your system. Okay, the system that had the feedback, they've destroyed it. And over the years, the system was not giving people a chance to develop themselves. And this is why the people were moving more towards the West. It was not the lack of freedom. Believe me, you could travel the Soviet Union in so many places, so many ways. The same as it was happening in the West. But the lack of freedom to see other countries, the lack of freedom to see other views, and take your own judgment and bring those ideas home and say, look, this is the part I like. This is the part we have better. How about we connect those two parts and make a better system? How about we don't go into extremes? Because if people understood the way of life in the West, the way it was in the West, they would have understood that the socialism has been achieved all the way in the 1960s, probably before that. I mean, yes, for a while, the space race, I think, gave everybody that feeling of achievement as a whole. Like, you know, as a group of people, we're taking part, we've sent the first person to the space, you know, we have achieved that. It was a peaceful achievement and people were happy about this, you know. Somebody told them, you know, we built 1,000 nuclear missiles. People didn't feel it as an achievement. People felt it as, we need to do it. It's like it was a fear thing, but it's not something that drives people forward. A peaceful achievement of sending a person to space, I think, was galvanized Soviet Union a bit more than many things that happened after this. That lack of positive achievement is something which brings nations down. And we have to look at the history of Soviet Union and see what's happening these days. Because if we look at what is happening these days, this lack of positive achievement in society, maybe they're not entirely the same reasons that was happening in Soviet Union, but it's still, though, you look at things and how many young people have this feeling that they can't do anything positive. How many young women as well, you know, they grow up and they say, look, unless you're like, I don't know, an activist and something like this, you have not done anything with your life. Being a part of the family, being a mother to a child is not positive achievement, you know. You're just always struggling for more money and you're just struggling to get food. It's like, you know, this drive, but without the lack of the feeling of positive achievement, you know, of achievement that, look, you know, I've got like, you know, I don't know, I want to go traveling, I want a car, and I can't afford a car. Okay, cool, you know. or things like this, like this is what makes the society falter more and more and more and more. And in the Soviet Union, they say they went into another extreme and completely brought that extreme to the society, was not entirely ready for it, completely destroyed the society. I'm not advocating, let's go all social on us, let's bring in socialism. No. But obviously a bit of socialism needs to be brought back to society, but also a bit of responsibility from the top 10%, because look, if the top 10% does not change, if they continue destroying everything around them, they will be the one who's going to fall with us. We'll soon find another top 10% with other people there. Things will change. It's going to be bad for us. It's going to be bad for them. It's just they were never taught in the last 20 years. 30 even years, they were never taught. The people who are 50 now, going into their 50s, into their 60s, they were never taught that, look, guys, there is a part about social responsibility. The people in their 70s, the only reason they had social responsibility is because they were fighting the socialist state. And they always thought, look, let's just get rid of it and we're going to be great. No, guys, you will not be. People will not be. We've got to find the middle ground. They didn't find it in Soviet Union, and obviously we can talk more about Afghanistan and things which happened there, but all those things, they are a result. If we look at the reason, it's the fact that the country was not giving that level of education, that level of access to things, the level of giving people the level of achievement. Okay, once this is not there, say this was the reason. I could probably talk a bit more, but I've been doing this for an hour now. Surprisingly, it didn't seem so that long, but obviously I could probably tell a few more stories. Probably one interesting one actually before I finish. It was taught to us in the school by our history teacher. And the guy who was teaching us in our final year in school, he had a PhD in history. And he specialized at the time of the fall, the final years of, 20 years of Soviet Union. And he told us a couple of stories, one of them was from his life, which is, again, they had these groups of students in his university. And obviously, like every group that wanted to fight Soviet Union, there was somebody in there who was knocking onto the doors of KGB and looking after those guys. And part of this group was people from physics department, and another part of this group was the people from history department. And the people from physics department, they said, look, let's blow up a statue. We're going to blow up a statue of Lenin. And people from history department, it was I think their first year of university, so people are young, full of energy, but the history department said, look, we cannot fight a Soviet system with explosions. It's just not right. It's not going to get us anywhere. We have to start publishing a paper. We have to start to be active like this. We have to start being politically active. The people from physics department did not listen to them. So what they decided to do is they decided to build a bomb. At which point of time, the guy who was looking after all this shebang, the guy who was knocking onto KGB, he reported them saying, look, these guys are going to build a bomb. They're actually serious about this, and they're going to blow up the statue, So obviously it's going to be a terrorism. People could get hurt. And they were caught, but they were not caught building a bomb. They were caught trying to steal what was necessary to build that bomb. So they went to their physics department and they tried to steal some shit from them. And they were caught, and they were sent through the criminal system as thieves, obviously, because even if you want to build a bomb, you shouldn't really steal shit for it. Obviously, if they have built a bomb, they would have been sent as terrorists, and that would be a very much heavier kind of punishment. You know, they've been stopped from going to university back then. Obviously, I don't think they got actually time in jail, but they were excluded from university, and they've been sent as a punishment, as because it was their first crime. They've been sent to join the great Soviet military force. So they said, look, you know, you're gonna, if you're not good enough in university, let's see if you go and become part of the military, and they're gonna train you how to be a good people. The people that were in historical department, the ones that were against building a bomb, obviously they were told, look, you know what, guys, if you don't like Soviet Union, they at that point of time, they were part of this youth political organization, pro-Soviet organization, which is called Komsomol, and they were all excluded from Komsomol. They just said, look, you know, you don't like Soviet Union, you want to fight Soviet Union, it's fine, it's great, we applaud you for this, but you cannot be part of the Komsomol, which is a pro-Soviet, which is pro-communist organization, and then fight Komsomol. You have to do it, you know, on your own. On your own, you know, it's like, do it, you know, invest your own time, invest your own money, invest your own resources, and good luck. They didn't last very long, obviously, and by our professor said, by the end of the fourth year, the most hardcore of them have actually applied to be accepted back to the Komsomol, citing that they understood their mistakes. Okay, so that was the first story, he said. So it's like, again, you know, by that time we can see that Soviet Union was not that bad, but they were not also listening to the feedback. So obviously they fought the people who tried to fight the Soviet Union, but they were not listening to them, you know. Obviously they could have, if they listened more and got that feedback from those groups more, they could have probably caught it a lot earlier. And they could have caught it a lot earlier, they could have done more about it, and they could have changed the system to the point where the Soviet Union would probably still exist and would still be a socialist country, and it would still be driving the top 10% to be more socialist. But they didn't, so that was their mistake. And yet he told us another his story, which is like not widely known, but the guy, again, it's like end of 70s, I think. The Soviet Union is becoming a bit more relaxed, you know, and then there is like old hardcore general, and he was running all the troops. He was in charge of all the troops in the Moscow region. There's like a military region which was including Moscow, St. Petersburg, and a few other cities, but it's like central region. He was in charge of all the troops, and he decides to make a coup. He decides that all of a sudden look, you know, the government, I don't like the government, they're not doing what I would like the government to do. And he gives an order to his troops to enter the cities, to capture the cities, and to capture the parliament. Obviously his officers arrest him, because obviously many of them, they understand, they just recently had this issue in Czechoslovakia where, you know, yes, it was kind of peaceful, but there was still quite a few, you know, victims among peaceful population by simply somebody driving over a car they did not notice in a fucking tank. You know, and they had experience of this. Some of them, they already had some fight in Afghanistan that was already happening. And again, you know, they had that experience of the fighting in the city. And fighting in the city is a massive business. Ask anybody in the military, they will tell you, fighting in the city, especially the city that was not evacuated before the fighting, you know, just a small town, you are bound to have hundreds of non-military people dying. Going into a city like Moscow, which by that time had nearly 10 million people living in it, going to St. Petersburg and a couple of other cities like this, the amount of civilian casualties would be immeasurable. So they go, look, are you insane? And he says, no, this is the order, you have to follow it. And they arrest him. They say, look, you know what, mate, you're under arrest. We gave an oath that we will protect the people of the country. We did not give an oath that we're gonna go into the cities blasting the fucking cannons at them. And they arrested him and they gave him to the court-martial, and as they ill, he's just crazy, and he's been sent to a hospital and stayed there for years. I think they released him, but obviously they cancelled all his command rights and stuff like this. But the guy was truly insane, you know, ordering his troops. Can you imagine some British general telling, I don't like the government of United Kingdom, I want the Queen to rule, so I'm gonna order my regiments to drive tanks through London in the middle of a day. You know, if people here would consider this guy sane, then I don't know. I'm not guaranteeing anything. But this is a kind of couple of stories he told us, and what I'm telling them is, again, you know, many people think that obviously Soviet Union was this evil empire. At the start of it, there was lots of wrong has been done by Soviet Union, but the worst part of the Soviet Union of the end was not the fact it was evil, it's the fact that it was a system with no feedback. So you had this government which was so far away from the normal people, which exactly what we have now. We have half of our government, well, all of our government, let's be honest, they're fucking millionaires. They're so far away from the normal people, they so far they don't live the normal lives that they think it's okay to enter the dementia tax. What was it? Was it second room tax and stuff like this. So the situation in Soviet Union back then and situation in the many Western countries right now is not that different, guys. Just maybe from a different edges. So one was to the left, the other, well, this is my left arm. I think on Facebook it shows differently, but so I'm going to use this one. So some was to the left, someone's to the right, you know, other way around. Whichever way you look at it, but it was the edge of the situation where the people at the top are so far, so disconnected, like, you know, so, you know, if my body, this is my body, but those people are so far that, you know, my hands are so disconnected from the body of the country, you know, that the countries just fall apart, the nations fall apart, the whole civilizations fall apart. And I think this is why I think this talk is important. Looking at those reasons is important. It was, again, slightly a bit maybe convoluting. It's because without understanding those reasons, if we talk about anything, you know, there's been other subjects that's been happening lately. So me see this, like the next one I wanted to talk terrorism, racism, and the failure of political correctness, you know, or property and investments and how we're fucking them up, you know, or MGTOW, men going their own way. Talking about these subjects without understanding without understanding the history of the fall of Soviet Union and the importance of communication between socialism and capitalism, importance of communication between the leaders of the country, the governments, and the top 10%, and the rest of the country, the importance of the two-way streaks, you know, two-way communication, you know, not just from them telling us that, look guys, you're having it too well still, you know, until you all live on the street, we don't give a shit, you know, or, you know, until you're all millionaires without cars, we don't give a shit, you know. So with the importance of that two-way communication, the importance of the listening from the top, until we understand that, you know, those are the subjects, they are complicated, you know, they're not easy, but without understanding the basic flow of things, I would say it's impossible to describe those subjects. So this is why I decided to talk about the Soviet Union first, and then go on to other things. because, like I said in the last few videos, like the ones I made a few months ago, that my overall message these days is, look, we need to balance the system, and we need to start from certain things. So like a fair wage, for example, in other countries, you know, fair wage being paid by the big corporations, not just in UK but all over Europe, and how it's all connected, and a few other things, you know. But it's mostly my main message is saying, look, we need the balance. So, but without the understanding of the two-way flow that was lost in Soviet Union, which was ended up and it falling apart, without the understanding of the importance of people having the enough education to be able to appreciate other systems rather than some particular one that they've been taught, and this is the only right way, which doesn't happen. There's never only the right way when it comes to a complex system like a country or a nation. Hell, even a complex system like a factory. Try doing everything only the right way, and good luck with that. So until we get that, it will always be hard to explain everything else. Say, at this point of time, I think I'm going to finish. Again, I'm running over my usual, what I'm trying to do, which is an hour long. I will try to speak about other subjects. As I say, next Sunday I will be speaking about the election results. We'll see how it all plays out for this week. And after that, I'm going to talk about like quite a different subject, quite a heavy subject, which is terrorism, racism, and failure of political correctness. So I'm going to talk about that, but as I said, for now we're going to finish. And I hope that people who will watch this video will find it interesting. Any questions you want to ask about any subject, put the questions under the videos, under this one, under whichever ones you liked or want to ask me about. And if over time I will get more and more questions, I will put them together, and then I will obviously make a follow-up program talking about same subjects, maybe in a bit more detail according to the things you want to know more about. So thank you very much. Have a good night. Goodbye.